Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. My name is Nate Fischler. I am an Asia Pacific analyst with RANE. I mostly cover China, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands. I am here today with my colleague, Ekta Raghuvanshi, and we are here to discuss a parallel phenomenon in our two regions regarding arms diversification away from Russia. So I will be discussing Vietnam. My colleague Ekta will be discussing India. So hello, Ekta. Nice to see you.
Wonderful to see you again.
All right. So we'll start out with let me ask you, I guess, a little bit of history. So there's a long bit of history. We're both talking about trajectories from our regions into Russia. So could you maybe discuss a little bit what is the history between India and Russia, particularly in terms of their arms imports, their arsenals? What does that relationship look like?
um, if I had to give you an answer in one sentence, it's like the most important strategic relationship, but of course I will elaborate. So Russia and India go back a really, really long time. I think it's the same case with Vietnam that you will get to. It was since the Cold War. Russia was one of the first countries who was a reliable exporter for arms for India. India, of course, has had two, three wars. It has conflicts with Pakistan on the border. Now it has a standoff with China on the border. So national security has been very, very important to India. Arms purchase has been super important to Indian national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia was one of the first major countries which was a major supplier to India during since the Cold War. Like I said, the first cargo I think from Russia was transport aircrafts. It was in 1950s. Then the MiG 2100, the MiG 21s, and then it only increased through the years. There was a little bit of a lull when the Cold War ended, I think, because of own supply side disruptions from the Russian side. But between 2021 and 2001 and 2021, there was a rapid increase in imports. And between 2011 and 2021, is there a disturbance I'm hearing?
I don't
Okay.
know. I think
I
we're
thought
good.
I heard something in the background. That's fine. No, I just wanted to highlight that years between 2001 and 2021, there was a rapid increase in imports. And between 2011 and 2021, India's total imports from all the suppliers, uh, except Russia, I mean, Russian imports made 59% of the imports, of the total arm imports. For a country like India, which has like more than 1.3 million people in its armed services, uh, that is why Russia is very, very important. There are very basic reasons for why Russian partnership is important. Of course, there are political, ideological reasons. Russia was one of the first countries, major countries, which provided all these technologies to India. Technologies, very, very important technologies, just highlighting a few of them: missiles, missile systems, aircraft, helicopters, naval vessels, aircraft carriers, battle tanks. So everything that you could imagine, even ammunition, everything that you could imagine, that all the three uh, parts of the forces, the army, navy, and the air force require, that's all Russia based in India, at least. I always think why. Of course, the one reason is Russia has been a long time strategic partner for India. There is a deep sense of trust in India for Russia, because Russia has never been a state that has hampered from India's perception, that has hampered India's growth, technological growth at least. Uh, I don't think in the history Russia has ever levied sanctions on India like there were sanctions from the Western sides when India carried out its nuclear tests or things like that. So there is a deep trust like that between Russia and India. Of course, the armed procurements from Russia have been very, very cost effective. I've just read some estimates. They say it's like 30%, 30 to 35% lower cost than what Western uh, technologies would be. And it's easier. Both the countries over the years have developed a system in which now they also make very important critical systems, uh, like the intercontinental ballistic missile. They jointly developed them, and there are also prospects for exporting those systems jointly developed by both Russia and India to other parts or to other countries in the world. So this partnership that India has is one very important. I cannot stop emphasizing how important the Russian partnership is. The very important and the very evident uh, evidence of this is throughout the year 2022 we saw India has never objected on Russia's war, or objected on Russia's war in Ukraine. It has stayed neutral, which has really bogged the Western countries, and yeah, they're not happy with India's response. However, they've come to terms with India's new neutrality now. But yeah, we see how Russia has been so important to India throughout its history. I think since its independence. Very similarly, I think Vietnam is very parallel case in your region in Southeast Asia. Can you maybe elaborate something about Vietnam with Russian arms?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that rundown, that historical rundown. We thought this was an interesting topic to discuss. Not, it's not only timely, but the parallels are really very many. So
Yeah.
similarly, Vietnam, when it became, Democratic Republic of Vietnam or North Vietnam, the Soviet Union, Moscow was one of the first countries to recognize the new North Vietnam. Ideological compatibility that Russia or the Soviet Union at the time gave really indispensable military aid to the Vietnamese as they fought the French and then they fought the Americans. And the streamlining of really sophisticated weapons technology for the time that Vietnam had no indigenous capacity to manufacture on its own. And it was more sophisticated than the Chinese weapons that they were likewise receiving, created a long-term dependency on these weapons systems. So they came to realize very quickly that, hey, not only is this a good way to import these weapon systems that we need to defend against these much more high-tech, wealthier countries, but this is a partnership that can really last for a long time. And it has. Russia, well, Soviet Union, and then Russia has probably been Vietnam's best friend, closest partner in the military sphere, as well as the economic development sphere for decades. The reason we're bringing this up now, of course, is the war in Ukraine has changed a lot of the calculus around that. So to go a little bit more in depth into the recent history, the established streamlining of weapons flowing from Moscow into Hanoi made it so that from the last 25 years or so, Russian weapons have still constituted, I think, even a higher proportion than India's. It was up to 90% of their arsenal came from Russia until 2014. And it was in 2014 when things started to get really hairy between the West and Russia. That was when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula away from Ukraine, sort of the precursor to the war that we see ongoing there now. At the time, there were supply issues because some of the naval vessels in particular that Vietnam was hoping to acquire from Russia were complicated by that because the engines for those vessels were being manufactured in Ukraine. So they weren't able to get the engines for the ships that they had ordered. And the West obviously came down. Well, they didn't do that much, but relations deteriorated significantly between Russia and the West. So the light bulb first came on in 2014 to Vietnam that, hey, we need to not have 90% of our weapons come from Russia. This is a huge vulnerability. They've been moving away since that time. The arsenal, Vietnam's arsenal of weapons, however, is still in the high 60s, Russian made. So this really highlights, which we'll get into a little bit, the difficulty in diversifying your arms imports as the stockpile of weapons and the technology that they're familiar with, and even the relationships between the weapons exporters and the weapons importers and the government officials involved in the deals are very familiar. So that vector is very convenient. But let's get into a little bit more about what's going on in 2022.
Mhm.
So, as far as India is concerned, we just laid out how for decades India has been importing and been dependent on Russian arms. What are they doing now to change that dynamic? Are they successful? What are the difficulties involved, etc.? You can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So just like you said, it was the 2014 Ukraine occupation or territorial occupation in sorry, Crimean invasion in 2014. That was the light bulb moment for Vietnam. I cannot pinpoint a light bulb moment, but since the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, there has been a increasing urgency in India also, because they've realized, of course, that you cannot depend just on one nation for all your arms imports. In India's context, you said now Vietnamese, the Russian arms make about 60-ish%. India's also, all the numbers that I was trying to find, the 60% was the most famous number that I found, but there are many estimates that also said it's very much between 60 to 80, and it differs across all the three different parts of the military. It's the Indian Air Force is the most dependent on Russian systems because everything is Russian made, basically 90%. Indian Navy less so, because one, Indian Navy is not very well developed for itself, and it is just not. Uh, Military is also very dependent, like 80 to 90%. It's dependent on Russian made systems completely. So I think that of course, I thought of the parallels. It's just striking how similar those are. But yes, 2022 was a a defining year also for India. It had already started uh, diversification. I would just lay down very broadly two things that India has been doing for the past few years. One, there's a very strong impetus on indigenization, because self-reliance or atmanirbhar, as we have the Indian policy, it should be the self-reliance policy also for defense weapons is very important in India now. They think they have, they can start to go towards indigenization. Of course, it will be a very slow evolving process through the years. It won't be easy whatsoever, but they've started it. How they're doing it, I could get into that a little bit later. And second is diversifying away from Russia. So yes, Russia still makes about like 59% of India's imports, but it has been decreasing since, I think, 2014 or something. Countries like, I think the second country from where India imports is France now. So France makes up a good chunk of Indian imports. Definitely not as much as Russia does, but it's a second, and US is the third. Of course, there's always interest from countries like Israel, which is known for its own technological developments. Uh, so I think there's this two pronged strategy that India is doing. One is indigenization, and second is going to other non-Russian suppliers. Of course, Western suppliers, also looking to Western suppliers. I think as I was trying to see how this has changed over the years, uh, I could probably say that. Oh yeah, from indigenization, what I found out was about 68% of the capital budget in the last budget was for defense manufacturing industries. That is only indigenous production. So India is very serious. There's also one thing that India came out this year with was in March 2022. It the defense wing released a list of about 300 items. These are 300 small systems, I think radars and things like that, and other systems, which comes into this list was an import ban list. So India cannot ban this. India cannot import all these items. These were very strategic items. Most of them were what India originally imported from Russia, but it decided to put this into this negative import list so that it could give impetus to the local industry and the defense. like all the armies and the armies and the military in India, they've been saying this for a long time now, that we need our own industries, our own public sector companies to manufacture all these critical systems for us. So I think that's one way of doing it, I think. And it's a safer way, I think, how India is doing it, because if you have a negative list of like 300 items, and it comes under an import ban or something like that, you can always go back and slash some of the items if you need them, if you absolutely need them because of some urgency. So those are the two very broad things that India has been doing. One, going to other suppliers, to Western suppliers. And second is indigenization, and very strong impetus on indigenization. Has it been the same for Vietnam also?
Yeah, I'd say this is a major departure. We have so many similarities, but this one's a little different.
Hmm.
It seems to me that India has more capacity for an indigenization effort. Unfortunately, for Vietnam, they don't have much capacity to produce at least high-tech weapons that they need to carry out their anti-area denial strategy, which is basically aimed at China, deterring China from taking more of the South China Sea. So they need basically anti-aircraft, anti-submarine systems that they're not really capable of manufacturing on their own. Small arms and ammunition is a different story, but for these really sophisticated things, they have to look elsewhere. So they may look to indigenize later, but that would be a very long-term, slow process that would require technologies that they do not currently have in abundance. And this is extremely difficult, really, to acquire these systems in numbers that make sense for their needs. So in the intervening period, since there's been this about 30% decline in imports, weapons imports from Russia, the top new partner is Israel, and they provide aerial defense missile systems that can shoot down planes, shoot down cruise missiles, things that can deny potential incoming aircraft control over the skies. But that still only constitutes about 14% of new imports. They've also imported from South Korea, the Netherlands, and there's another one, Belarus, although that's not that different from Russia and the Netherlands. Did I say that already? Maybe I did. Those are the countries that are working to make up this difference right now. The United States, if I can insert them into this narrative for a second, have been trying since 2016, since the Obama administration, to sort of wean Vietnam off of Russian weapons, even though Vietnam wants to do that anyway. So Barack Obama lifted the lethal arms, the ban on selling lethal arms to Vietnam in 2016, which a ban that had been in place since the Vietnam War era. And this was in order for the U.S. to sell more weapons to Vietnam. That has materialized a little bit, but still U.S. Origin items are only about 3% of the arsenal. So a lot gets tangled up in U.S. regulations, transparency, and particularly the price tag. So Russian weapons are a lot cheaper than U.S. weapons. And the major challenge also is integrating these systems. So interoperability might be the primary deterrent or constraint, rather, on diversifying away from Russia. So these technological systems, you can't just buy new weapons overnight, integrate them into your existing strategy and your existing technological setup. Lots of times these systems have to be built from the ground up, because one component won't work very well with a Russian, a US component won't work so well with a Russian component. They're not designed to be compatible, and they aren't compatible. So any kind of diversification effort would have to be built from the ground up, which takes a really long time and costs a whole lot of money. So the U.S. efforts in that respect have been slower than desired. And I guess another thing that we should touch on is some more rationale for why they need to diversify away. So let's throw in, since we're talking about the U.S., fears of sanctions. After the Ukraine war, of course, the West issued a whole slew of sanctions against against Russia, against Russian exports. So there's the Countering America via Sanctions Act. Let me look that up. Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. To the U.S. law, sanctions
I
countries
just
for buying Russian weapons.
that's easier.
CATSA, yeah. So Vietnam has been exempt so far because the U.S. values it as a strategic partner. What are India's feelings about CATSA? What does it do to their calculus as they make policy?
Yeah, simply India is also exempt because now India is being becoming this very very important partner in the region for the US. Uh, in like US sees India as this counter force against China in the region, in the South Asian region. They have propped up their military defense partnership in the past few years. I think that of course, like Vietnam. There was a lot of talk when the war started. India had one delivery of the S-400 missile systems left. It was due in this year sometime, and a lot was said about India's position in the war and how US would react if it would in fact take the S-400 delivery. But that did not happen. I think, like the US has done in the past, they used a CATSA waiver, especially for India, exclusively for India. They did it, I think, this time also. So, of course, just given the position, India's position currently, uh, with respect to the war, with respect to the larger geopolitical shifts that are happening, and with respect to its importance both to the West and the world, I think it has this privilege, I would say, where it still can import, and that did not affect, at least the waivers and sanctions directly did not affect India like that, especially the CATSA ones. Having said that, many defense companies in Russia were still sanctioned, and those companies have there's a lot of delay in many important shipments to India from Russia. Of course, Russia's own war, its capacity has completely reduced. We've seen talks about Russia's own systems failings and things like that. And I think it's important to mention that Russia also used Ukrainian systems. I mean, there was this joint development with Ukrainians, and then there were many systems that came from Ukraine also to India. So that the war in that important region completely, I think, changed the calculus for India. Delayed system deliveries. We don't know if we'll get many important systems, and that has just made diversification all the more important for India. Going for newer partners, maybe going for indigenization. Just going back to the point, yes, India does have a bigger capacity to maybe indigenize, but it'll be a very, very slow process. Very slow process, might I say. I mean, they'll take a lot of time to acquire their own their to acquire technology, in fact, from other countries, maybe from Western countries in the future, and develop bigger important systems. But they still will continue to depend on Russia for the next like decade or so, and then probably on other countries also, because it's very very difficult. It's a very slow and evolutionary process. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think on that note, so general thrust here, 2022 watershed year for both India and Vietnam because of the war in Ukraine is the largest factor. Both are looking to diversify away from Russian arms that they've been dependent on for decades, which is easier said than done. Both face huge challenges in doing that, and both will continue to be reliant on Russia to a medium to large extent in the short term. Long term, maybe a different story, so we'll have to wait and see. But I think that's all the time we have for today. So Ekta, thank you for joining, and thanks to everyone for watching.